The flashing red and blue lights bounced off my windshield like an accusation, turning my quiet driveway into a crime scene. I stepped out of my car with my hands visible, heart pounding, trying to understand how parking in front of my own house had led to a 911 call. My neighbor, arms folded and lips pressed into a thin line of satisfaction, watched from across the lawn like she just won something important. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a driveway. It was about power. I'd lived on that street for nearly 12 years, long enough to know every crack in the pavement, every tree that leaned a little more after each storm, long enough to keep my head down, wave politely, and mind my own business. I was used to long days and quiet evenings, and I valued peace above most things. The house wasn't flashy, but it was mine. The driveway had been poured decades before I moved in, legally surveyed, clearly marked. I'd never once imagined I'd need to defend it. Her name was Linda, though everyone on the block whispered Karen behind her back. She moved in about 6 months earlier, bringing with her a constant cloud of complaints. The mailbox was too close to the curb. The trash cans were out 5 minutes too long. Someone's hedges were half an inch over the imaginary line she carried in her head. I'd heard her voice raised more times in those 6 months than in the previous 10 years combined. At first, I ignored her. When she left a handwritten note on my windshield saying I was blocking community access, I smiled and tossed it in the recycling. When she knocked on my door one Saturday morning, demanding I move my car because it made the street look crowded, I calmly explained that it was my driveway and closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The night she called 911, I'd come home late. Court had run long. The kind of long that drains you in ways sleep can't fix. The sky was dark, my shoulders were heavy, and all I wanted was a shower and silence. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, breathing. That's when I saw her storming across the street, phone already in hand. She didn't knock, she didn't ask. She stood at the edge of my driveway and started shouting that I was trespassing, that I was blocking emergency access, that she'd warned me before. I told her, evenly, that this was my property. She laughed, a sharp sound full of disbelief and triumph, and said, "We'll see what the police think." By the time the officers arrived, a few porch lights had clicked on, curtains shifted. The neighborhood had turned into an audience. Linda launched into her story with practiced urgency, pointing at my car as if it were a weapon. She said I was aggressive, that I refused to cooperate, that she feared for her safety. Each word felt like a small betrayal, not just of truth, but of basic decency. I answered the officers' questions calmly. I showed them my ID, my address, the registration that matched the house behind me. They were polite, professional, but cautious. False accusations have a way of hanging in the air, even when they don't make sense. After a few minutes, they confirmed what I already knew. I was legally parked on my own property. They apologized for the inconvenience and turned to leave. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Linda stood there, face flushed, eyes blazing with humiliation. She didn't apologize. She didn't back down. Instead, she shouted after the officers that she'd take this further, that she knew her rights, that people like me couldn't just do whatever we wanted. The words "people like you" stuck with me, echoing long after the lights disappeared down the street. A week later, I was served papers. She was suing me for harassment, intimidation, and obstruction of access. The claims were thin, almost absurd, but they carried weight, legal weight. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to anger. Not loud anger, but a deep, steady resolve. I requested the case be transferred to a different jurisdiction immediately. Ethics mattered. Transparency mattered. I followed every rule to the letter. When the hearing date arrived, I took my seat not behind the bench, but in the gallery, like any other citizen. Linda arrived confident, chin high, a folder clutched to her chest like armor. She smirked when she saw me, clearly expecting an easy win. Then the judge entered. The moment she realized who was presiding, the color drained from her face. I saw recognition flash in her eyes, followed by panic. This was the courtroom where I'd spent years upholding the law, the place where I'd sworn to fairness and accountability. And now, by her own choice, She stood there answering for a false 911 call and a baseless lawsuit. The proceedings were calm, methodical. Evidence was presented, body camera footage, property records. The transcript of the 911 call played aloud, her voice sharp and exaggerated, claiming danger where there was none. With each piece, her story unraveled. The judge's questions were precise, unwavering. There was no room for theatrics, no space for entitlement. When the ruling came, it was firm but fair. The case against me was dismissed entirely. Linda was fined for misuse of emergency services and warned about filing false reports. She was ordered to attend a community mediation program and informed that further actions like this could result in more serious consequences. The courtroom was silent as the weight of accountability settled in. Outside, she avoided my eyes. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But I also felt something else, a hope, not just for myself, but for the idea that truth still mattered, that systems could work when people respected them. Weeks passed. The street grew quiet again. Linda kept to herself. One afternoon, she left a note on my door. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement. She wrote that she'd acted out of fear and control, that she'd let small things turn her into someone she didn't recognize. I folded the note and put it away. The next time I parked in my driveway, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors. No lights flashed, no voices rose, just the sound of my car door closing and the familiar comfort of home. I stood there for a moment, grateful, because the lesson wasn't about power or titles. It was about restraint, about choosing truth over ego, and about remembering that behind every driveway, every dispute, every call to authority, there are human beings who deserve respect. And sometimes, the strongest judgment isn't handed down from a bench, but carried quietly in how we choose to live afterward.